Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Line podcast. Today we have Maggie Norris, CEO of Aidaly. Aidaly is a healthcare technology company upskilling family caregivers with the training, coaching, and compensation to provide quality care in the home. Maggie, I'm so excited to chat with you. As we were talking before the show, not only have I had an intimate relationship with healthcare before and seeing kind of caregivers, but I'm so excited to see what your company is doing to really empower. I don't know if it's an underserved, part of the workforce, but it's definitely one that needs a lot of disruption and needs a lot of support in terms of not only tools and infrastructure, but all the things that would help kind of satisfy the care that people need at later parts of life and the workers that do it. But before we get into all that at Aidaly, what were you doing before you started the company?
Well, first, I'd like to say thank you for having me. This is great and it's fun. In regards to what I was doing before Aidaly, right before Aidaly, I had worked briefly in venture. And prior to that, I had started a company called Uphold Health. And what we did at Uphold Health is we helped families navigate end-of-life decisions around advanced care planning and long-term care support. So it kind of lended itself nicely into what we're doing today at Aidaly.
Yeah. And what got you into healthcare and kind of in the onset of your career? What was interesting? What was exciting? What inspired you to go into this part of the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't set out wanting to work in healthcare. I wanted to be an improv comedian. I wanted to
Really?
be a writer, Saturday Night Live. That was my goal in life. But in my early 20s, both of my fathers experienced cancer, and I was their primary caregiver, doing everything from bathing, feeding, administering medication, coordinating care, along with my family. And I just became very passionate about improving that, not only that experience for the care recipient, but improving that experience for families who are going through what I went through.
Yeah. And it seems like it's such a common experience now for people to help their elders transition, even despite of cultural background. I think my family comes from Mexico, and so we obviously have ways that we transition people out of our family. But it's seemingly like everybody wants a similar experience. But I'm curious to share with the audience to give some context. How many people have this as a common experience for their elderly parents that are transitioning out of life? How many people are then tasked to be caregivers outside of providing or purchasing professional care?
Yeah, absolutely. So currently there are over 43 million unpaid family caregivers in the United States. 53 million, doing everything from bathing, feeding, administering medication, coordinating care, rides to and from doctor's appointments. And that care is worth over $600 billion to the economy. So on average, you're looking at 20 hours a week, 20 to 25 hours a week. And this is a very common experience right now in the United States. It's only going to become more common as 11,000 people turn 65 every day in America. They're living with 2 or more chronic conditions, living longer than expected on less than expected. So the role of caregivers is going to increase over time. We're kind of at the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. And what historically has it always been family caring for family, and or has there been an opportunity for, say, professional caregivers? And what essentially, I guess, would define someone's access to having somebody that they can pay for or have as a caregiver in home, maybe through insurance or means, and having to rely on family?
I think this is a common misconception that once you turn 65 and you're eligible for Medicare, that Medicare provides home care, and that's just not the case. So for the average family with this rising cost of care, an increased demand, I should say increasingly complex care needs. So these 2 or more chronic conditions, complex needs that they have in the home, the average family can't afford to have a full-time caregiver in the home out of pocket. And so that often falls to a family member who either leaves the workforce or goes part-time. And now you have a family unit down to 1.5 income, multi-generational family, often living under one roof. And so it becomes a financial strain on the family to provide that care in the home.
Yeah. And is there any outside support outside of having to work and earn a wage? Is there any structural support that we have now currently in our government or in our healthcare system that allows them to either be compensated or decrease the amount of cost that they have to accrue while they're taking care of their parent?
Yeah, so through Medicaid, there are programs, long-term care programs and waiver programs that the family member can be compensated for that long-term care in the home. We're seeing a shift to home-based care and not only Medicare, but Medicaid, not only Medicaid, but Medicare is catching up. to the cost savings associated with keeping people in the home and thinking about long-term care and support services in the home. I think we're just getting started with those support services in the home offered through Medicare, predominantly Medicare Advantage plans. But a lot of that in-home support that then is provided is still facilitated by a family caregiver. So while it might provide some respite for a family caregiver, the bulk of that role is still on family to coordinate.
Yeah. Yeah. And describe, I mean, I could think about, of course, the individual frustrations and impact it must have on the family member that had to compromise to be able to provide this care. But if we don't address it as whether it's a private company or whether it's society or government, what are the economic effects or the effects on the total population if we don't address an issue like this, not even just on an individual level, but, in more of a macro level?
Yeah, it's quite significant. Like I said, 53 million family caregivers, 500 billion worth of care to the economy. I think when you think about, so there's two things. There's the workforce shortage. Right now, we have 2.6 million home care providers. In Florida alone, we're looking at another 700K needed by 2026. We just don't have the workforce to provide this care for this aging population. And so the way I like to kind of describe it is you have this aging population that's living longer than ever expected, on less than they ever expected, rising cost of care, rising cost of living. And then you have a workforce that just doesn't exist to provide that care in the home. So the care is going to fall to a family member. And this is why we saw during the pandemic, we saw hundreds of thousands of people leave the workforce to provide that care in the home because they didn't have a solution for home care. There weren't enough home care providers to come and take care of their family. And so as we see this aging population increase, we're going to see more and more people leave the workforce, but we're also going to see more and more seniors falling into financial hardship trying to pay for long-term care, and families trying to reorganize their kind of intergenerational kind of responsibility for that care. Yeah. And it's going to largely fall on millennials and Gen Z, unfortunately, to provide that care for that generation. So really, we're at a point where if we're not filling that workforce need, what we're having is less people active in the workforce and less contribution to GDP and less money floating around to be spent on goods and services for this aging population, which is not good for the economy in general, in a whole, right?
Yeah. And there's a specific section of the population that this affects the most. Is it depending on socioeconomic status or region on where you live? Who obviously I can see that everybody could be impacted by this, but if there a section that in particular has a little bit more, overall impact in all ways.
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting is it impacts mostly people who are just above that line, that Medicaid qualification line, and just below that kind of comfortable socioeconomic background where they have disposable income or enough resources to cover long-term care providers out of pocket. So you have this bulk of the U.S. population that are not quite qualified for Medicaid. And then there's a whole number of hoops they have to jump through. There's the Medicaid spend down. There's all kinds of financial tools that they can use. But for the majority of them, it requires getting on Medicaid to access the long-term care services that are really the high-quality services or wraparound support services in the home that reduce that burden on family or allow them to employ, right?
Right. And in regards to the training and the preparation that people have to be able to do this type of home care and care for their family members well, how much of a gap is there between a family member taking care of you versus somebody who's a trained professional? How much learning do they have to take on, but also how qualified are they to do this in the onset? Obviously, people are brilliant about learning skills and being adaptable, but on the onset of this, I'm sure there's a steep learning curve to be able to provide all this care in not only with medication, but just in a comfortable living situation.
Yeah, absolutely. In many ways, family caregivers are more qualified, right? They have a vested interest in the person they're caring for. They pay attention to details. They're consistent day to day throughout the lives, where your traditional home care career caregiver is seeing multiple patients or multiple clients in the home, and it's a high turnover rate. So in many ways, family caregivers are more knowledgeable and more skilled and more competent at providing long-term care to their loved ones. It is when they have increasingly complex needs, like changing a feeding tube or administering medication or shots. Those are types of things that even in a hospital or healthcare setting, it requires a trained professional to do. And so you as a family member have not gone through the same training and learned those skills. You're really kind of winging. And unfortunately, when you're yes, YouTube's fantastic. You can learn a lot of things on YouTube.
Yeah.
But I think as general, as a health system, we don't want family caregivers going to the internet to learn skills. That there's historically been great training and great resources for developing those skills professionally.
And describe Aidaly and how it's helping to address that problem. What's been exciting about not only the current progress that you've seen, but also the next step and where you're aiming to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we do at Aidaly is we help family caregivers get compensated for the work that they're already doing. We provide the training and support and resources to provide care, long-term care in the home. What that looks like is we qualify them for state programs or insurance programs that compensate them for that in-home care. And then we do all of the paperwork, and then through that process, provide the training, whether it's background checks, fingerprints, all of the credentialing required for them to be a in-home care provider to a family member. And then we compensate them through Aidaly. I think what we're most excited about are the opportunities to find additional ways to compensate caregivers, whether it's through making sure that they've gotten the care recipient has received their annual wellness exam, and how much is that worth to a health plan, making sure that that care recipient has adhered to their medication on a monthly basis, and how much is that worth to the health plan, and thinking through ways that we can compensate caregivers for that work that they're already doing, but then also ensure that we're kind of documenting that work that's being done in the home, and bringing the knowledge that family caregivers have about patients and plan members in the home, and bringing that information and data back to health plans and payers and stakeholders in a meaningful way that can help drive health outcomes.
Yeah. And how did you define, say, like the pricing structure of something like this? And for other founders out there who have a very strongly mission-driven company addressing a really underserved part of the population, there is a challenge in identifying the price for the value. But this offers a lot of really unique business models. And I'm curious, was yours always the same? And where is it now? And how has it transitioned?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, luckily for us, that there's already a set rate for in-home care. We know we've set that at the state level of how much health plans are paying for in-home care. So there is a set rate already or value already attributed to what that in-home care is worth. And so from our perspective, it's not only training caregivers and credentialing them so that they qualify for that same compensation, but then also recognizing that there's additional value that they can add simply by being in the home on a consistent basis. Yeah. So we're lucky that the model already exists for paying for home care.
And in particular, how difficult and what's the challenge around building technology in healthcare? How often do you have to not only reinvest in educating the team on new, say, laws or regulation, compliant? Obviously, HIPAA is a huge thing when you're working with healthcare professionals in any degree. What are the challenges of building around those kind of structures? Or is there some kind of comfort in knowing where the guidelines are and where your place is to provide help?
The healthcare, it is ever changing. Yeah. So regulatory compliance concerns, just healthcare in general is always changing. And so I think part of it is just making sure that you're hiring people who are very passionate about what you're doing and staying up to date on kind of the changing landscape, and then making sure that you have great advisors around you that have the industry expertise that bring that to the table. That's been really helpful for us as well. I'm hopeful that as we continue conversations with the state and the federal level, that some of these regulatory kind of hurdles that are put in place for
Yeah.
early stage startups like us, or not for, but I guess are in place and hurdles for us to jump, we can find ways around those so that it makes it easier for us to serve patients in a meaningful way.
And thinking about the way you build technology for such a large section of the population, I'm sure your customer profile must be ever changing and so large a broad stroke that I'm assuming you would have to focus on building very simple solutions, but that do very robust things on the back end. What are the challenges as a founder that you've had to overcome, and some learning curves that you've had to take on yourself to be able to build such a easy, I've looked at your website, I've played around with it. It's very simple and easy, digestible, but that's not hard, or that's not easy to do. Very challenging.
Yeah.
How have you been able to do that and build a team that be able to deliver such a simple solution?
Yeah, I think it's easier when you were the user, right? So I
Yeah.
was a caregiver. I know what I want. I know what I wanted. And I know that where the kind of gap in the market exists. And same with the majority of it's at Aidaly is we've been caregivers or we're currently active caregivers. And so we understand the language and we understand kind of how to the simplest version of a complex solution that's going to add value and drive value today for caregivers. So it's kind of been easier to think about that. To your point about the kind of what happens on the back end. Yeah, it's quite complex. You have moving parts of people operations, you have technology and data being used, you have the regulatory and compliance factors, and then you have various stakeholders that you're kind of trying to satisfy in various ways. And so I think that it makes for a fun adventure. It also can sometimes be challenging. Yeah. And that's the fun. I it's the fun. The challenge is the fun part.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that a lot of the team members have been or are currently home caregivers. And describe what are the challenges in terms of hiring those types of people and finding the right talent for such a mission-driven company, and a company that I would think relies heavily on having that experience be so common across the team to be so empathetic for the customers that you're serving. How has it been easy to find talent? Has it been hard to evaluate it? What have you learned as a founder? As after we're done raising money, we're building teams and focusing on products, but the team aspect is so critical for the success.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you mentioned, I mean, it's a large demographic, 53 million family caregivers in the United States. So you, it's been eye-opening in interviewing people for different roles at
Yeah.
Aidaly, how many have experiences as a family caregiver or a family member. Their mother is a caregiver to their grandmother, their sister is a caregiver to their father. I mean, that's very common in those discussions. I think it's something about family caregiving. It touches everyone. Everyone knows somebody who's provided care, and everyone knows somebody who has either dealt with the financial hardship of being a family caregiver or the professional kind of, they've left the workforce and have now started to re-enter or re-engage the workforce after being a caregiver for some time. And so hearing those stories, that is a big part of what we optimize for at Aidaly, is having that empathy for family caregivers, the struggle that they've been through, and the passion to want to change the existing status quo and really make a difference in those people's lives. And that's a huge part of our hiring process.
Yeah. Yeah. And thinking about it, whether it's externally or internally, what are some of the biggest challenges that Italy faces today?
So you nailed it. Team is just hiring the right people at the right time, putting them in the right role, and being clear on what success in that role looks like. I think in early stage startup, particularly startups that were founded in the last 2 years, they're all remote first, and so you have a very distributed team. And when you have a distributed team, a big part of making sure that you're working in sync is aligning communication. Building culture virtually is in and of itself its own struggle. So I think that's internally the biggest struggle that we face as an organization, and any startup founded in the last 2 years or that was alive and well in the last 2 years has experienced this problem. In the future, I think a lot about building culture with a distributed team. I think a lot about bringing the right people in at the right time. I think about capital needs in the coming years and what that looks like. I think about the competitive landscape and how we make sure that we're positioned really well for the next 10 years. And I think about how are we building a differentiated solution? How are we significantly better than what currently exists in the market? And continue to improve not only our internal product and processes and team, but also our offering to family caregivers.
Yeah. And if everything goes well, what's the long-term vision?
Yeah, our goal is that within 10 years, everyone will know someone getting paid to provide care in the home through Aidaly. And we see family caregivers being an integrated part of the healthcare system, being supported, acknowledged, compensated like the healthcare providers that they are, and really bringing family caregivers under one umbrella and creating a space for them in a growing and evolving healthcare ecosystem.
Yeah. Amazing. And I love in the next section, I call it my founder FAQ. So I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions and we'll see where we get. The first thing that I would like to break this one to open up. What's particularly hard about your job outside of, I know a lot of founders say this prioritization because we've all, I think, kind of faced the issue of prioritization, but I'll bet a prioritization was the hardest part of your job.
Knowing when to jump in and jump out. I think that's a big part of when you're an early stage founder, you really you're so passionate and obsessed with, what you're doing that you want to have a hand in everything. And I think for a team to grow, for a company to grow, you need to step out of roles and bring people in who are better suited or more equipped to take that to the next level. Yeah. And so I think that's the hardest thing of knowing when to hire and knowing when to jump in and do the work yourself. So that's part of it.
What's one of the more surprising skills that one wouldn't expect to have to learn when they have to take care of a family member? Anything come to mind?
Surprising skill?
Yeah.
Well, one, I think oftentimes there's a role reversal, meaning the child that's now caring for a parent, it becomes the parental role to their recipient. And I think knowing how to be a good friend and a good advocate is a huge part of being a good family caregiver because you haven't been in that role for a parent or a grandparent or even a sibling previously. So really just being a good friend and being a good advocate and being comfortable with that transition of that role reversal.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about what comes in that transition from that dynamic. And what are some of the ways, I guess, just for Aidaly's purpose, are you investing in kind of that experience? And it's almost like the mental health and like work-life balance kind of, it seems like in that realm of like that health and wellness. What are some ways that you've implemented in Aidaly to help these individuals almost like cope with and really take care of themselves during this transition? Because I'm assuming not only with the role reversal, but also that dynamic change and the additional responsibilities, it's heavy. Mm-hmm. It's a lot.
Yeah, it is. And so what a big part or a big component of what Aidaly offers is by unifying family caregivers, kind of teasing them out of an existing home care environment where they're grouped in with career caregivers. We're giving them a place in a community of other family caregivers that have been through what they've been through and they can lean on for support. So a lot of that conversation happens just organically in our community around kind of how they're dealing with the emotional strain and kind of frustration that comes with being a family caregiver. We also offer support groups that they can jump into and kind of share their experience and hear other people's experience and get support. And we offer financial coaching, free financial coaching to all of our family caregivers so they can start to feel like they have control over the family finances and the caregiving expenses and start to make a plan for the future. And what we found is that the more organized and the better you are at planning, that de-risks or that de-stresses that kind of experience and allows them to open up and think more about the kind of quality of care that they're providing for a loved one. And so we've seen those two parts of like the additional services that we offer to be really helpful to our family caregiver. Yeah.
It's amazing to see the amount of resources and what you're doing in that realm, because I assume it has such positive impacts and even measurable impacts, I'm sure, in the quality of the care and the success of getting the right care resources and for that individual to feel acknowledged or even understood in that realm, that they're not alone in this experience because it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Thinking about just from a product standpoint, advice for other founders who have a target market and want to, one of the biggest challenges I think, if I'm thinking of your business model in a way, just getting a lot of customers to adopt the platform and getting out in front of them, whether it's through ads or word of mouth or anything like that. Is there anything that you've seen in terms of strategy to get in terms of go-to-market strategies that have been successful, like aligning with partnerships or unions? Or what have been successful in that? Getting customers is just hard enough, but what are some strategies that you've deployed that kind of help expedite that growth?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, I will say, it's not being my first time around and mistakes I've made in the past, but this time around, just focusing on a small group of people that you know that you can serve and making sure that it's a lovable product that they, and learning from that early small group of users. That is the kind of lesson I would say to people trying to build or find growth. I just focus on a small group of people and not knock it out of the park for them. And then second, on growth side, what we've seen success is tapping into existing groups, existing networks. So we have, as family caregivers, we know where family caregivers are. We know the communities that they're a part of on Facebook or the blogs that they follow or the kind of threads that they're reading on Reddit. And so go to where they are. Don't try to pull them into your product because, you want to go to where they are and meet them where they're at and be a part of the community that already exists. Right.
Yeah. Incredible. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely the ease of taking on, or the ease of just gaining that trust with the initial customer, being there, being present, and understanding that where they're coming from. I would like to ask this question as well as kind of along the time of prioritization piece, but is there anything that you spent too much time on that you wish you could spend less, and something you spend too little time on that you wish you could spend more at the found?
Yeah, something I've been working on is time to decision making. So if it's a decision that can be made in a day, or is it a decision that should be made in a week, and knowing the difference, right? And so if it's a decision that can be made in a day, it should be made in a day. And if it's a decision that needs a week or needs a month or whatever it is, give it that time, but really quickly identifying if it's a decision that can be made in a day or not. And that's been helpful. I think in the early stages when you're trying to discover what's going to work, what isn't working. Also, I think the biggest thing is just focusing on what is working. And that's super helpful with prioritization. It just puts all your energy on what is moving and what's working. And it kind of prioritizes itself that way.
Yeah. I love to ask this next question because I love how founders extract knowledge from anything that they ingest. So there's no boundary or rules here, but if you think early in your career or now, what books or people have been influential or highly impactful for you?
Yeah. So other than books and people, I would say improv. I was a huge improv geek for a long time, love improv comedy, and I think it's had the biggest impact. And there's a lot of parallels to learning how to work on an improv team to learning how to function in an early stage startup, right? It's you're saying yes and supporting other people's ideas. You have no idea what's going to happen when you get on stage. You're kind of just going with the flow, but you know that you're going to support the people that you're out there with and really listening to what other people's kind of ideas that they throw out, agreeing to those ideas, committing to those ideas. When the crowd laughs, you all share in that laugh. When they don't laugh, you kind of all share in the misery that you didn't get the laugh. So I think that that's a part of early stage startups as well. I highly recommend taking an improv class. It also loosens you up and lets you talk. I think for me, as like a more, I would say, on the shyer side of humans, it helps me talk about complex problems or more emotionally charged issues and kind of think on your feet and think on your toes and be ready for whatever's thrown at you. So that's been super helpful for me. And I highly recommend it to anyone who's thinking about not only a career in entrepreneurship, but thinking, even if you're an early stage founder, thinking about getting out of your shell a little bit, helps with pitches, helps with podcasts, helps with whatever is on your agenda. Highly recommend.
I've never heard that on the show before, but I'm interested in how many founders from now moving forward become improv connoisseurs. I joined team, but myself included, I don't know. I'll have to maybe think about that one. I'll have to try. I mean, I'm in Los Angeles, so there's a lot of opportunity on me. But my partner, she's the funnier one, so then that changes the dynamic in a different way. I'm
No,
just kidding.
she's enabling you. She needs to kick you onto the stage. That's what needs to
Yeah,
happen.
that's probably true. That's probably true. I love to always make sure we covered everything, and I want to make sure that we didn't leave anything on the table. So, if there are any questions that I didn't ask you, anything that you would have liked to answer that you didn't, or that you would have liked to chat about, anything that we left on the table. Sure. Let me reframe this question then. Describe to the audience, describe to the audience the impact, not only on, obviously we talked about the certain section of the population that's impacted, but women in particular. You had some really interesting statistics that you mentioned before the show and had before the show that I think are kind of alarming in terms of the disproportionate impact on not only women, but women of color in particular as well. I know you had some interesting statistics there.
Yeah, so the average caregiver is a 49-year-old woman who works outside the home and is providing 20 hours per week of unpaid care. An estimated 66% of family caregivers are female. So we are seeing an increased number of men, but still majority family caregivers are women. And the financial impact of family caregiving equals about $324,000 in lost wages and Social Security benefits. So there's not only the additional strain on a family caregiver in addition to work that they might be doing outside of the home, but then you have the financial strain of lost income and Social Security benefits. And then female family caregivers are spending as much as 50% more time than than male family caregivers spend providing that care in the home. And so I think when we talk about the distribution of family caregiving responsibilities largely falls to women. And the financial impact of family caregiving disproportionately impacts women.
Yeah. And what can be changed in the paradigm to whether it's offer more care from the opposite gender or even just make the burden not only just minimized on the impact of their career and also their time and everything that their responsibilities. If there are things that we can change in the paradigm now outside of obviously cultural and societal expectations that unfortunately just add more responsibility to women just in the onset, what could we change now as a paradigm moving forward?
I think the language that we use is huge around what is work and what isn't work, right? So
Right.
providing care to a child with a disability or intellectual disability, that is work. Providing home care like rides to and from doctor's appointments for a aging senior, that is work. If it's work that would be compensated otherwise, if a family member wasn't doing it, if that work is largely falling to a woman in your family, recognizing that it's work, communicating in the language that you're using around it, I think has a huge impact. For many family caregivers, recognition is part of it, but then the next step is compensation. So if there is value, if you're speaking to it, which we do it, was that my notification? I'm sorry. Do you want me to start over? Could you cut that out? Or?
No. Yeah, we'll cut that out.
Okay. But yeah, so I think just communicating that you recognize that the work is work and appreciating that work. And then the second step is compensation for that work. And we're seeing a trend in home care, right? Because we have that existing kind of model for home care and that value that's attributed to home care. But I'm hopeful that all domestic labor will eventually follow suit in that roles that largely fall to women and that disproportionately impact women financially will get the recognition and the compensation it deserves.
Yeah. It's amazing to see that, especially post-pandemic, when a lot of people had to reflect on kind of the mechanics of just the world and the work and their life and everything and how really the incentives were not necessarily in line with the outcomes. The incentives were more so about working for a corporation and even if you do, what benefits do you get from then? And make sure that it is in line with your overall life and satisfaction. All these, I think, important aspects that were immaterial being is extremely important to someone's overall life satisfaction. And a lot of people are gaining agency back in that, which is amazing to see.
Absolutely. We see this. We see when we speak about paradigm shifts of people not wanting to return to the in-office kind of setting of corporate America and saying, actually, I really like being able to be home with my kids. I really like being able to sit with my grandma during lunch. My grandma with Alzheimer's or dementia, right? I like having those aspects of family woven into my life and being a caregiver for the people in my family, that's really important. And when we're hearing this narrative kind of across everyone is as a result of the pandemic. And I think that that's really refreshing. And it's also, we've also the other side of it, right? Of parents who are home with children and recognizing the amount of work that goes into providing that support to or caregiving to a child, whether kind of putting eyes to the work that goes into that. And same with people during the past 3 years who were all of a sudden thrusted into this role of being a family caregiver to an aging or ill loved one and recognizing the amount of work and support that that requires. So in many ways, the pandemic was really, really hard on family caregivers. It was also an opportunity for people to see the work that goes into caregiving and start to change the narrative. So in many ways, it was a blessing as well.
Maggie, it's been such an amazing conversation chatting with you, not only about your career, but also what Aidaly is doing and kind of the overall attention that this section of the workforce really needs to not only have impact on the individual level and the familial level, but also economically and in our greater society as it's becoming more and more of a common experience with people as people are aging and in that whole, in the transition in life and things. That last little bit is, where can we find you? I know we're coming to the close of the episode, but I always like to give my guests a chance to give us your plug. What are your websites? What are your LinkedIn? What are your Twitters?
Yeah.
Where can we support not only Aidaly, but you as the founder?
Yeah, so you can go to aidaly.com, AIDALY.com, or see us at Join Aidaly on Twitter, join_Aidaly on Instagram and TikTok. And you can find me at Mag Norris, MAGNORRIS on Twitter as well.
Amazing. Maggie, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and thank you again for being on the show today.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. This has been great.